Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are going to unpack what has to be one of the most intense, gripping pieces of ancient literature you will ever come across. We're talking about Psalm 50. Now, you might hear the word Psalms and immediately think of quiet, comforting poetry, right? Well, the text we are looking at today is something entirely different. It is a literal cosmic courtroom drama. We're looking at a scenario where the ultimate judge arrives and the entirety of humanity is put on trial. It's an absolutely fascinating dive into ancient concepts of justice, ritual, and morality. So, let's set the scene.
Right out of the gate, the text establishes this terrifying majesty of the judge arriving on the scene. The source tells us, "Our God comes. He does not keep silence. Before him is a devouring fire, and around him a mighty tempest." I mean, wow. This isn't some quiet, subtle entrance through a side door. The mighty one is stepping into the courtroom, and the sheer force of this arrival absolutely demands your attention. The era of divine silence, it's over. The trial is about to begin.
Looking at verses 4 through 6 here, you can see how God summons the ultimate jury. He literally calls out to the heavens above and to the earth to witness the judgment of his people. The cosmos itself is taking a seat in the jury box. Then he calls forward his faithful ones. These are the people who have made a covenant by sacrifice. At this point in the text, you'd probably expect a warm commendation, a pat on the back for their loyalty. But as we're about to see, the trial takes a massively unexpected turn.
Which brings us to Exhibit A, the myth of hungry gods. The ancient world was just full of religious systems where people genuinely believed they had to feed or bribe their deities. Let's look at how this text puts that whole idea on trial.
Okay, here is the massive plot twist of the passage. In neighboring ancient cultures, take Babylon for example, myths actually depicted gods swarming around sacrifices like starving flies because they literally needed humans to feed them. This highlights exactly why Psalm 50 was so incredibly radical for its time. The judge looks at the people who have been meticulously following the rules, bringing their burnt offerings continually, and just abruptly rejects them. He says, "I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds." It's shocking. They brought exactly what they thought the rules required, and the judge basically says, "Yeah, keep it. I don't want it." So why? Let's look at the logic. To explain why these sacrifices are getting rejected, the text uses the striking metaphor of scale in verse 10. The judge declares ownership of every beast of the forest, and famously, the cattle on 1,000 hills. When you really stop and visualize that number, 1,000, it just puts everything into perspective. It illustrates the sheer, overwhelming scale of God's domain. If the Creator already owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, human offerings of, a single bull or a goat, it suddenly seems completely, totally insignificant.
And notice the rhetorical absurdity here. The text asks, "If I were hungry, I would not tell you. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats?" It's almost funny, right? It highlights how ridiculous it is to think that an all-powerful, self-sustaining creator would somehow need to get a meal from humanity. The judge is completely mocking the premise that a divine being requires human rations. The trial exposes that God absolutely does not need their stuff. So, what does he actually want?
This brings us to the actual requirement. Instead of transactional blood rituals, the text calls for a sacrifice of thanksgiving. Now, what does that mean? It means offering genuine gratitude, performing your vows, and actually relying on God by calling upon Him in the day of trouble. It completely redefines the whole relationship. God wants authentic trust. He wants a genuine connection, not some empty ritual. And the promise in return? Deliverance.
All right, moving on to Exhibit B, the hypocrites on trial. Having dealt with the misguided rituals, the judge's attention turns sharply to a totally different group in verse 16. Let's look at the charges.
Look at this stark contrast of hypocrisy. On one side, we have their claims, right? They are constantly reciting religious statutes and taking the covenant on their lips. They sound incredibly holy. But then, on the other side, look at their actions. They secretly hate discipline, and they literally cast the judge's words behind them. It's the classic case of talking the talk but not walking the walk. Their outward religious claims are completely invalidated by a rebellious inner life.
And the text gets incredibly specific with these indictments. The judge just rapid-fires them. You see a thief, and you're pleased with him. You hang out with adulterers. You give your mouth free rein for evil. Your tongue frames deceit. You even sit around and slander your own brother. The tension here is just palpable. It perfectly showcases how their day-to-day behavior, fundamentally and shockingly, betrays the supposedly holy words they keep reciting.
To ground this harsh rebuke back in the ancient text, we look specifically at verse 21. For a long time, while these people were committing all these hypocritical acts, God did nothing. But now, the silence is officially broken. The judge says, "These things you have done, and I have been silent." The trial has reached its climax, and the judge is finally laying the charge directly before them.
This brings us to a really fascinating psychological insight. I mean, why did the hypocrites think they were getting away with it? The judge reveals their ultimate error right here. You thought that I was one like yourself. Wow. Because God was silent, they mistook that temporary patience for approval. Actually, it's more like they projected their own corrupt, compromised morals onto the divine, assuming the judge was just as apathetic to their deceit as they were. It is a truly chilling realization.
Which leads us to the final phase of the trial, the verdict. A stark ultimatum. The judge doesn't just leave the courtroom hanging. Let's see how this dramatic summons concludes. This final warning pulls absolutely no punches. It says, "Mark this then, you who forget God, lest I tear you apart and there be none to deliver." I mean, that is intense. It demonstrates the severe, high-stakes consequences of living a life of empty hypocrisy and ignoring the core tenets of justice and genuine faith. It's a very sobering reminder that actions have inescapable consequences in this cosmic courtroom.
But wait, the trial doesn't end merely with a threat of destruction. Here is exactly what is required to survive the judgment. Step 1. Offer thanksgiving as your sacrifice, bringing genuine gratitude, not bribes. Step 2. Order your way rightly, meaning your moral actions must actually align with your beliefs. And step 3 is the ultimate result. To this person, the judge will show the salvation of God. So, the crucial point is captured beautifully in this closing thought from verse 23. The one who offers thanksgiving as his sacrifice glorifies me. It perfectly summarizes the entire narrative arc of Psalm 50. It's this massive shift away from transactional, superficial rituals, moving toward a life defined by authentic faith, deep gratitude, and true moral integrity. That is what actually honors the judge.
As we close the book on this ancient courtroom drama today, we really have to ask ourselves, are you just going through the motions? Are you trying to bribe the judge with outward rituals and right-sounding words? Or does your life reflect an ordered way, driven by true, genuine gratitude? It's a pretty powerful thought to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to reflect on that verdict.